Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today with a slightly different video, but one that I really hope you'll enjoy because I have put a lot of time into this and it's something that I personally really enjoy doing. Cube is something not known fully to everyone, so having some sort of content out there to try and make it a little bit more popular is something that I'm very excited to be involved in. And I really hope you do enjoy this video because Cube, in my opinion, is one of the most fun things you can do within the Pokemon trading card game, and it has longevity to it. I think there'll never be a time when you don't like Cube. There'll be people, if you have friends in the Pokemon trading card game who no longer play, they can still have a wild time with Cube. So great to do within friends, great to do before big tournaments and stuff like that, just because it's a load of fun. And when you gather a bunch of Pokemon people, you can't have much more fun than going for a cubing session. So in this video, we're going to be going over what is a cube. We'll have a little overview of what the drafting process is like. We'll look at some key components of what makes a Pokemon cube, giving some examples along the way. I'll talk about different sizes and ratios. Don't get too concerned about this. This is really for those trying to build a cube. I'm really trying to go through that process for you within this video. We'll have a look at my own cube, one that I constructed a few months ago. We'll talk about custom cards as well, a little fun addition that can be added to certain cubes. I'll talk about the ongoing process of building and how cards can adapt when new cards are released, etc. We'll also look at the best options that you can go for right now when trying to build your own cube. And then we'll round out some closing thoughts overall what I think about cubes. So this should give you an overview of what cube is if you just want to turn up and play with people, but it should also give you some more inside knowledge in building your own Pokemon cube if you're not knowing where to start off, even though you do know about the concept itself. So hopefully this is a useful video for a bunch of different people. Right, let's start off. What is a cube? A cube, as you can see pictured, this is actually my own cube, is simply a large pool of cards which has been specifically assembled for the purpose of being drafted. And essentially, the creator of the cube is in charge of every card that can be drafted from. Therefore, they dictate the power level, the archetypes, the strategies, and this will all come together to make the overall gameplay experience when constructing decks and battling with your friends. So as you can see here, a bunch of different cards showing on the screen already. Again, this is a snapshot from my actual cube, but I've decided every single card of this pile of cards that people can use to then build decks from. That's essentially all it is, really. So in many ways, it's not much different from a regular booster draft that you may have done at like pre-releases and stuff like that. But instead of using packs in order to build a deck, you're going to be constructing boosters from the cube itself and then using those cards to draft from. So if you're getting over-intimidated by what a cube is, think of like a booster draft, but instead of us ripping open booster packs, you've just got set cards in front of you instead, basically. A very, very simple concept made more complicated than it should be, really. So let's have a look at the drafting overview. So now that you know what a cube is, you can pretty much just sit down and play whenever you want to, as long as someone else has made a cube for you. So if you've got a friend who already has a cube, this is basically what you're going to do if they have one. So first of all, you're going to randomize the cube, shuffle it all up, make sure everything is nice and separated. You don't want to have full evolution lines, etc., all next to one another because it makes it more difficult for everyone, really. People trying to follow that line of evolution, people not going for that evolution line. It can change all sorts of different things. So keeping a cube as randomized as possible before you start playing is really good. And then you're going to separate this cube into equal packs, as I just said. Let's use the example of going for a 10-card pack as if it was just a booster. You're going to separate this into, basically you're going to split your cube up. However big your cube is, there can be multiple sizes, but depends on how many players you have as well. So let's just say in this example, you're going to have 8 players, and the cube is 640 cards. That means each person will get 80 cards to draft from, and from those 80 cards that they pick, they have to build a 60-card deck. So in this example, let's say you're the player on this little chair right here. You start off with 80 cards in front of you, split into 10, or 8 packs of 10. So you pick up your first pack of 10 cards, and you see a really good card that you want to take. So you take that card, and then you pass it along. Every other person, they've also got a pack of 10 cards in front of them, and they're going to take their favorite and pass it along. You're going to continue to do that until all 10 of these cards, or, well, I guess all 80, but each person's 10 has been used up, and then you'll take the second pile that you have in front of you. So now you have 7 piles remaining. and you'll then take one and pass it along. Typically, you reverse the order just to make it a little bit more random, and so that it's not so reliant on the person who's sat to your left or right. Then it's a little bit more varied, because some people will be taking and passing up different cards, of course, based on what they're trying to follow and what they're trying to build. So typically you want to reverse the order each time, but essentially you're going to do this, take one, pass it along, take one, pass it along, until you have constructed, or until you have 80 cards in front of you from which to build your deck. So every person then has their selected 80 cards, and you've got to get building at that point. So from there, you're going to try and make a viable deck. As you can see, there's energy cards at the bottom of here. Obviously, it's a Pokemon deck. Most of them require energy to function. Basic energy cards are not part of the cube, so those are provided afterwards. So although you are drafting 80 cards, I mean, how many energy do we have there? Something like 14, something like that. So really, you're not really building... like, the restraints aren't that high for building a deck. And as you can see, oftentimes people are able to find full evolution lines, get some good supporter cards and stuff going on in here. Don't get overawed if you don't recognize what these cards are or anything. My cube is a singleton cube, which I'll discuss in a moment, and there's cards from all sorts of generations, but you can dictate this. As I said, if you're in charge of building a cube, you can choose whatever you want to have in there. But this example I just used Empoleon because it's a pretty standard card in some cubes, to be honest. From there, once everyone's built their decks, you got to go battle people, of course. It's not, although it is fun to draft and build decks, the real key is to beat people with those decks. So depending on how much time you have, you could do a round robin, you could do Swiss, you could do knockout games, however you want to do it. You got to beat up your friends with your fun deck that you've just created. And that's pretty much an overview of cubing. So if ever someone asks if you want to join them with a cube, do it, because the drafting process is fun. If you have some time to kill, you can have some great battles with fun decks. And that's pretty much the overview for people who don't know what a cube is. So I am going to quickly mention how you can change the drafting process. As I just mentioned, take one, pass it along is pretty much like the standard method that everyone uses to draft. But if you're bored of that, or if you've had the same cube for a long time and you want to spice things up, you can drastically change the outcome of what people actually end up drafting deck-wise based on how you do this drafting process to begin with. So rather than take one, pass it along, you could maybe try doing something like take one, discard one. You could do take two, pass it along. You can have a go fish option where you have excess cards of your cube that sit in the center of the circle or whatever of your friends. And rather than taking a card from the pack that you've got, you can choose once or twice, maybe during the entire draft, to go fish instead. And obviously you have to remove a card from your pack, so you maybe have a discard pile alongside the go fish pile, because otherwise the numbers are skewed. But that can incorporate a little bit more randomness, and it means that some people aren't getting potentially just weak cards that never help them out. But that's obviously part of the drafting process regardless. But having a go fish option can add a bit of a random element, especially if you have a odd number of people, because it's hard for you to have a complete cube active with an odd number of people. There's typically cards left over. So that's when you can try incorporating a go fish pile to have fun effects. Because, for example, if you're trying to chase an evolution line and there just happens to be like 2 of the stage 2 Pokemon in like the 20 cards left over that you couldn't do for your cube, by having a go fish pile, people actually still have a chance to get those cards. So there's a reason to have a go fish pile. It could be something fun to incorporate. Another thing could be allowing 1 or 2 trades once the draft is actually completed. I'm not fully behind this idea because it does sort of make it a little bit easier for everyone to pass up on certain cards, knowing that they could maybe trade for them later on. But allowing maybe each person allowed 1 trade with someone else, it can cause a real cool, like, thrifty dealing situation with people. Almost like a Monopoly style effect where you're trying to really go for a last ditch effort to improve your list whilst other people are trying to get 1 or 2 pieces to make their own strategies work. I think this could be good for beginners if maybe you're not fully accustomed to the drafting process. It can really make up for a mistake you made here or there. So maybe it's something you just allow newbies who you haven't who haven't drafted before, maybe you give them that courtesy, give them like a courtesy trade or two after the draft is complete to make sure things go well. That's something you can do to make it a little bit easier on some people. My personal favorite thing, which is actually a card that I've added to my own cube, is this card here. It's called One Man's Trash. It's a custom card that I've made with custom rules, which I think is really cool. You can pause and read this if you wish. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail because it can be a little bit confusing, but if you want to incorporate this exact card into your cube, go for it. I think it's a load of fun, and it's been successful. But anyway, there's lots of different ways you can make a draft a little spicy. As I said, it doesn't have to be the cards within the cube that have to be wild. You can just change your drafting process, and that'll be really insane. As I said, though, don't want to go too much into this. Don't stress out about it if you're getting confused at this point. It's not all that relevant. Take one, pass it along. It's still like the gold standard for drafting, really. So let's go back into Pokemon and what goes into a cube. As you would imagine, we start off with the main evolution lines from each type. Now, depending on the size of the cube, you may not have every single type of Pokemon in there. But typically you want to have main evolution lines. Usually it's a stage 1 line and a stage 2 line of each type. So you're going to have, in this example, our grass type stage 2 is Meganium. You could then have like a stage 1 Yanmega alongside that. Then you'll have a stage 1 and a stage 2 fire type, stage 2, stage 1 water type, stage 1, stage 2 lightning type, etc., etc., with high counts of these. So you're likely going to have something like, I can't remember what my numbers are. It's like 5 Meganiums, 6 or 7 Bayleafs, and like 7 or 8 Chikoritas, something like that in the cube for people to draft from. And then that'll be the same for all the other types out there. So the main bulk of the cube is actually just evolution lines a lot of the time. So bear that in mind. From there, there's lots of support Pokemon that we've seen. We all know things like Uxie, Dunsparce, and then there's even things like Marshadow. Newer cards are obviously welcome in the cube as long as they're balanced. But yeah, lots of non-evolving Pokemon that have nothing to do with the main evolution lines, but can sometimes have synergy with them, or just allow you to get set up in the first place, or add a little bit of chaos into the mix sometimes as well. So these are important cards for the cube also. And from there, it's just going to be things like supporters, trainers to help you get set up, tools, stadiums, and special energy cards. Basically anything that would go into a normal deck is all within the cube. So there's lots of variety with all these things, lots of synergy with certain archetypes, lots of universally helpful cards like Ball Search cards, A-Specs, stuff like that. They can all be thrown into the cube, and that's what it's going to be comprised of, really. Please note that, as I said earlier, basic energy cards, they're not part of the actual cube itself. You can get an infinite supply of these outside of the cube. It's after you've finished drafting, you can just, whoever's built the cube should have energies with them, and then you can just ask them, can I have 16 water energies or whatever for me to finish my deck, and they should have that on standby. For those of you building cubes, bear in mind you're gonna have to have personally I have like 40 of each energy just on standby in sleeves, so people can build decks. If you really are stretched for energy cards, I mean, you really shouldn't be. Energies are very easy to come by, but if you are, you can even proxy basic energy cards, for example. So yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be too difficult. Alrighty, so let's talk about building a cube. So if I've lured you in to cube and you're excited about this concept and you want to start building, you are in charge. If you're the one building, you make every single decision that happens in your cube. So it's all down to you, really. So it's all down to your research and what you want to see within a cube. I'm going to give you a few pointers and stuff here and now and talk about the best ways that you can have a wide card pool available to you to choose from and make sure that it's all fair and balanced. So whatever you want, that's the thing to bear in mind, but here are some examples of what many people do use. So I used the term singleton cube a little bit earlier on, and that simply means that there will only be a single copy of each individual card within your cube. This is probably the most common thing we see with Pokemon cubes. So if you are using a Gardevoir line, for example, rather than having all of the Secret Wonders Gardevoir, the one that everyone loved back in Worlds, and was part of the infamous Gardy-Gallade deck, instead of having all of those cards, you're going to have one copy of that Gardy and then a bunch of other Gardevoirs from different generations as well. And this makes it a little bit more interesting when you are in the drafting process, you never know. You could be chasing an evolution line and you never see the right Gardevoir that you want to, or you may get one early and that can set up your draft later on to be like, well, I've got the best Guardy, so I don't think anyone else will be taking this evolution line, so maybe I can start plucking away at it, whatever. So yeah, I really like having Singleton. I think it really does spice up the drafting process as well as the playing process as well, because there's a lot more variety if people are having to face lots of different Gardevoirs throughout a game or throughout a best of 3. So it really does create variety in the games as well. So I'm a big advocate of Singleton, and it's the cube that I've initially started off going with. However, there's nothing wrong with trying to have multiple copies of a single card. For example, it can strengthen an archetype's identity. Think about this Gengar, the Creepshow Gengar. Never quite worked out in Standard, but you could give it a second chance in a cube. And you could have multiple copies of this guy to try and make the Gengar archetype be, a spread archetype or a, Creepshow style win condition where you're trying to set up damage everywhere and then take one-hit KOs with them. You can really put your stamp on a single archetype by having continuity with your main evolution lines. So if all 5 of your Gengars are this one, you're going to pull off Creepshows quite a lot. But you can have that going on with every archetype. You could have even an archetype that has healing around the board, so it's a straight direct counter to Gengar, for example. So you can balance it however you want. But overall, I think you should only really use multiple cards, I think, for sort of balancing. So you could have a semi-singleton cube where you have 1 or 2 cards here and there which are the same copy of cards, just so that you maintain balance between archetypes. For example, if let's say you were building a Torterra line and it was just low on the power level, you could take out one of the worst Torterras and add in a second copy of one of the better Torterras and see how it performs in another draft soon after, because naturally there are some cards when you use a singleton, some will be better, some will be worse. So if you have more of the better cards, that archetype is going to succeed more. So you can do that for balancing reasons, or if you just have a certain favorite species of Pokemon that you want to shoehorn into your cube no matter what. Let's pretend there's maybe one of the newer evolution cards, maybe like a Decidueye or something like that. Obviously, you're not going to use Decidueye GX, but if there's only 1 or 2 Decidueyes which has been printed, and you just want to put Decidueye in your cube because it's Decidueye and you love it, you can obviously not really go for the singleton option because there's only 1 or 2 Decidueyes that have been released. So you can then just have, 4 of the Sun and Moon Decidueyes thrown in there, and then everything else could be singleton, or everything else could be multiples as well. Oftentimes, if you're going for just one block of sets, you're going to have multiple copies of the same card as well. So there's lots of reasons to go for singleton, but there's lots of merit towards going for multiple copies of the same Pokemon as well. Let's talk about constraints. There aren't any, really. You can use Pokemon cards from all sets available to you, from base set all the way up to the most recent set available, which is Forbidden Light as of recording, but it can go even towards the future, of course. Whenever new sets come out, these are always cards to consider for your cube. Alternatively, if you want to recreate the feel of a certain era of Pokemon, you can have your cube between a certain number of sets. For example, if you want it to be a Wizards of the Coast only block of sets, you can go from base set all the way up to, Skyridge. Or you could just have the old EX era of sets. You could just have your cube within that. For example, if, like I said, if you have friends who used to play and no longer do, you can completely construct that cube around the nostalgia element that you had back in the day playing those cards. You can do whatever you want with your cube. Some more experienced people who have built cubes have gone for a mutant approach to building. This is by far the most work-intensive way to build a cube, and it does take a long time, and it is not easy. But it does mean that there's basically no dead weight with your entire cube, because every card will be useful. As you can see on the screen, if you're building an electric line, Emolga is an amazing starter. Electric is an energy accelerator, and Magnezone Prime is insane, right? All these cards are incredible. Whereas if you had to build non-mutant lists, oh, by the way, I should signify that mutant is that Pokemon evolve via type, not via like Pokemon itself. So Emolga can evolve into Electric. Electric can evolve into Magnezone. And it means that, for example, let's use the Torterra explanation again. There are many Grotals and Turtwigs that are just boring cards, but you need to have them in your cube because they evolve into Torterra, which is one of the evolution lines that you have in your deck. Whereas if you're building a mutant draft, you can have tons of interesting, there's like Yanmas with free retreat, there's loads of Roselias, Roserades, and then you can still have Torterra at the top, but he can be sat alongside Sceptiles and, all these other grass Pokemon. You have the entire universe of Pokemon. Every card ever created is available to you when you build a mutant draft. Whereas, although it is the same when you're building a regular cube, it's not really the same because you're only taking a snapshot of certain evolution lines. So, as I said, it's a lot more time consuming to build a mutant draft, and it's also very, very difficult to draft from for beginners. So I think if you're a beginner to cube, you probably don't want to start off with a mutant draft, because it's even difficult to draft and play because there's so much variation going on. But if you are confident with cubes, if you've done them previously, it is a really creative atmosphere, and so many outcomes can happen with mutant drafts. It is very interesting, very fun, and there's literally no dead weight in the cube as well, which is like, overall, that's something that you really look for when you're building a cube. You want to have as little dead weight as possible because it makes everything more exciting and every decision's harder, and that's overall a better playing experience for everyone. So mutant is something I would explore after maybe building your own cube, or if you're not up to building your own cube, participating in other cubes and then seeing what you would like to do yourself. Mutant is something that I think I want to move on to now that I've built a regular cube, for example. So let's talk about, once more, how you can bend the rules, as I said, to open up your card pool. That's pretty much the main thing we want to do here. Opening up your card pool just means that you have more interesting, more exciting cards available to you. So if you bend the rules in order to do that, that's fine, because, as I said, you're in charge. A great way, or a few great ways you can open up your card pool, becomes available once you add these or remove these restrictions. For example, having fossil Pokemon, some of the most mistreated cards throughout the entirety of Pokemon, you can just say, you know what, you don't need that mysterious fossil. Just treat this as a basic Pokemon. As long as you tell people the rules before you start drafting, it's all fair game. As long as everyone knows that Aerodactyl's just a basic Pokemon, and you don't need a mysterious fossil under it, that's fine. It even opens up some interesting, like, Kabutos can do some setup attack, stuff like that. There's all sorts of interesting, especially Aerodactyl, there's all sorts of fossil cards that then look a little bit more viable, as long as they don't have to be fossil Pokemon. Another thing that opens up the board is cards that have labels on them. For example, a Dark Ivysaur, and a Alolan Dugtrio, Team Aqua's Groudon, or whatever it is. These are all cards that if you just ignore the little tag and just allow them to evolve up normally, that's going to be fine for you. So if this Dark Ivysaur can evolve into a regular Venusaur, that's, it just means that you can play with this card now, and you want to play with Dark Ivysaur because he's got a really cool Pokebody which can create gusting effects, which is fun. So there's all sorts of these sorts of Pokemon with tags on them, and if you just say, hey, everything that says Ivysaur, treat it as an Ivysaur, that's fine. And finally, thanks to Power Creep, a lot of these lowercase EX Pokemon, the old EX era, they're not really good enough to give up 2 prize cards. You can just say old EXs no longer give up 2 prize cards, and then you can use them. So again, trying to open up your card pool as much as possible, I think, is really important when trying to construct a cube, because the more stuff you have available to you, the more likely you can cherry pick the best cards. That's just a natural thing. So in my cube, for example, I incorporate all 3 of these things. I have Aerodactyls, which are just treated as basics. I have cards like Dark Ivysaur in my cube, and I have lowercase EXs giving up only 1 prize because I think it's, again, there's cards like the Celebi that I want to have in the cube, but I don't want them to be completely useless just because they are 2 prize Pokemon. So yeah, I think it's fun to play around with the rules. As long as people are aware at the start, it's all good. The other thing I would mention is that there are inconsistencies throughout the generations of Pokemon. One thing that is unfortunately the case is that they have changed wording of certain cards. Even reprint cards like Judge, you can see supporter, whereas trainer supporter, and it can change certain attacks and stuff like that. So I don't think you necessarily need a compendium, but you need to outline the rules of your cube. For example, in my cube, I treat every supporter card as saying supporter rather than trainer supporter, and I treat all trainer cards, even like old trainer cards, as trainer item. So as long as you have consistency throughout your thing, there should not be too many issues with your cube. I have had a compendium once. I just have it on a spreadsheet of a few awkward Pokemon within my cube, just from people who have asked questions here and there. And that's something you can build up if you really want to. But overall, just be aware of these inconsistencies between the generations of Pokemon. It's a little bit of a hiccup here and there. But overall, I think it's something you can manage quite easily. So let's have a quick example once again. I showed off the Empoleon deck earlier. Let's have another example back with Gardevoir. This is again a deck that I drafted literally a couple of weeks ago. And you can notice here that it's a singleton cube. There's only one copy of each card. You'll also notice that I've incorporated a Alolan Vulpix in here that can evolve into a regular Ninetales, one of everyone's favourites, the Bright Look Ninetales. And you'll also notice that another rule has been broken. We're playing 5 copies of Ralts and Curliers, and the Gardevoir, well, there's only 4 Guardies, that's fine. But basically, you can bend the rules. You can break Species Clause. Essentially, if you've drafted it, it can go into the deck. That's pretty much the rule. So you could have, if you wanted to, 8 Ralts. So I think those are the real things to keep an eye on. But yeah, this is a 60-card singleton cube deck that was constructed. And it's a good one as well. I was pretty happy with this deck. Not bad, not bad. Alrighty, let's start talking about cubes of all shapes and sizes. So now that you know that you want to build a cube, how do you go about doing it? What's the best way to start building? What numbers do we need to crunch? I mentioned earlier arbitrarily 640 or something for 8 players, all drafting 80 cards, but what's the right number for you? Well, really, this is again down to you as a person. Design it exactly on how many players you're going to be drafting with. If you have a group of 3 friends who play Pokemon, who you meet at League weekly or whatever, try and build a 4-man cube. Or if the size of your cube can affect pretty much everything, really. It affects how many evolutions you use, the overall size of your deck, and how many people you'll play with. So there's advantages and disadvantages to all sizes of cubes. There's nothing like a big cube for a big occasion. I've had, sometimes I've had whole weekends dedicated to a cube with 8 or so people. But if you just want a casual night in with 1 or 2 close friends, a smaller card cube with just 40 card decks, even doing 4 prize cards, that can be a perfect solution. So really tailor it to how often you think you can get use out of your cube, or if it's not even how often, it's just how likely it's going to be that you can get like 8 people gathered to do a big cube. Basically, there's no point building a massive cube if you're never going to get use out of it. So that's really what I would say. But here are a few numbers. For a larger scale cube, I'd go for 720 cards. You can see here that 720 is a nice number because the cube is in full use between 6 and 9 players 3 times. And it's just good maths that way, because 5 packs of 16 is pretty nice. It means most of the time you see the pack twice, which is cool. So you have the chance to pass up cards and then see them again later on in the draft itself. It means that, as you can see, pretty large pack sizes for all of these. And each player is drafting a reasonable amount of cards to build decks from. I'd say 9 players is on the tight side. 80 cards means that you're not going to have much dead weight, whereas 6 players, I think, man, everyone's going to be drafting lots of cards that they don't individually use at the end of the day. But I think the sweet spot really for this is 7 and 8 players is probably ideal for 720 cards. You can see that the full cube is not in use when using 7 players. There'll be 6 cards that either you take out at the beginning of the cube, or you just randomly select 6 cards to not be used during that process. Typically, I prefer to take out cards before the draft even begins, because that way people can't get screwed out of certain cards. Like if there's really important stage 2 Pokemon within those 6 cards that you took out of the cube, it can completely ruin someone's day. So instead, maybe taking out the odd item card that's not that powerful, the odd supporter card that doesn't get used much, maybe some starter Pokemon that don't really help out, or on the lower power level side, you can just remove those, and then everyone still has an equal chance to draft main archetypes. I think that's usually my best solution. But yeah, this is built for 60 card decks with 6 prizes. You can see a couple of smaller sizes as well. I'll just go over these a little bit more. 624, I think this is also a pretty nice number to go for. Between 8 and 6 players, again, it's pretty nice. You can see 7 players. The odd numbers always make things awkward. But again, pack sizes are pretty good. You can go for 45 card decks, but really if you are drafting 88 cards with 7 players, you can still probably build 60 card decks with 6 prizes, to be honest. But it's all about time as well. Every time you're playing 60 card decks with 6 prizes, the games are going to be longer than 45 card decks with 5 or 40 card decks with 4. That's just naturally the case. So bear that in mind. Completely build your cube based on how much time you want to dedicate to the actual draft and the process of winning games and getting to the conclusion of a draft. It's all down to you, really. So you can go for lots of different sizes. Personally, I have a 720 cube, but I know what cards I need to take out to lower my cube for different sizes. So I've been I've done a lot of research into my own cube to make it perfect for lots of different occasions, but it's not always easy to do that. So just bear that in mind. These are 3 target sizes that I would use as examples, I think, and will be using throughout the video. Because I think they are nice golden numbers that just do good maths for trying to make cubes successful. So let's have a look at my formula. I basically inspected multiple results from lots of other cubes and narrowed down what I believe to be the best ratios possible. So as you can see here, just a handful of other people's cubes that are out on the internet right now. Puka's cube, I've played a few times, very fun. Alex Cook, he made a really nice PokeBeach article about cube a few years ago, I think. Matt Chen also has a cube, and Kenny has a mutant draft as well, which is pretty interesting. I looked at the numbers of all their cubes. I also took the percentages for their Pokemon tools, all that split, and I decided which ratios I wanted to have in all of these different cubes, to make it so that you have a good portion of supporters for everyone to use, so everyone gets working. As you can see here, I think in Alex's and Kenny's cube, supporters are basically premium. Whenever you see a supporter in one of their cubes, you got to take it. In Puka's cube, it's not so much, and in my cube, I think you'll take powerful supporters, but you can pass along bad ones, and I think that's what you want, really, from a cube. The same can be said, really, for other cards, trainer cards. These are all relatively safe splits. Kenny's cube just happens to have a lot more item draw than regular supporter draw, so that's why there's a split in that regard. But again, these columns down here, they're relatively similar. Matt has a really small amount of Pokemon and a really high amount of other cards as well. I couldn't actually get the breakdown of the other cards because he pretty much mushed them all together and it's too much time to spend on it. But you can see overall these are percentages that I'm happy with. So if you are making a cube to one of these 3 sizes, it should be pretty easy for you to make a breakdown, because actually I've done it for you. So again, here we go. You can see the 3 numbers down here: 720, 624, and 480. Basically, these are the numbers that you want to get to for your splits. 310 for main evolution lines. That's using 10 different types of Pokemon, so that's pretty much all of them. 9 types basically takes out like colorless or something, I don't know. And 7 types, you're again taking out, I don't know, maybe dark and metal, something like that. One of the lesser used types, or one of the less, the types that has less options available to you. Just remove those, really, and go from there. It still gives you a good amount of non-evolving basics that can be interesting to you. There's your total for your Pokemon and the breakdown of supporters, trainers, and special energy. I think this makes it really easy for you to make a cube when you have this sort of breakdown, because you can make a short list of the most interesting cards you think in each category, and then you can make cuts, basically, as if you were making cuts from a 60 card deck, but you're making cuts from 720 instead. It's pretty fun. I think this makes it very, very simple for people to build cubes. I think this is just a really easy way. I've done the maths for you, so just take that as if you take that seriously and accept that those are the ratios, you can quite easily construct a nice, simple cube that works out pretty nicely and has the right ratios for success for multiple people to build with. And that's what we're looking for, really. So do screenshot this or whatever, and we can move on. Let's look at cube construction in a bit more detail now. Possibly the most important thing when building your cube is, what evolution lines do I go for? Really simple, really, because as I mentioned, as you've seen on the slides, the main evolution lines really do make up the bulk of your cube, and they are the main driving factors in how gameplay will go. If you have an Empoleon archetype, you're going to have spread, you're going to have one-hit KO potential sometimes with some of their other attacks. You have the Supreme Command, Poker power on the level X. You have some really interesting interactions with Empoleon, but if you instead choose to go for a different stage 2 water type, let's say Blastoise, it's going to have a completely different feel to Empoleon. So this all goes down to your decision-making process, and it, you know, again, it takes research for what you want to do. I've done a lot of it for you, so don't stress out too much. But yeah, there's lots of factors you need to think about when thinking about your main evolution lines. You can think, are there any certain evolution lines that you or your friends really want to include? If it's just a favorite, if it's Charizard or Raichu or something like that, just get it in there. If you want certain types to have themes, you can have basically, you know, picking from your favorites. You can have the grass type being a tanking archetype. I've used Torterra as an example way too much, mainly because I had this slide built. If you want to have your grass type to be tanking, you could go towards one route. If you want to have your fire types to be energy acceleration, like the Blaziken and the blacksmiths and stuff like that, you can really go down a certain route. Do you want to have cross synergy between types? Do you want to have stage 1s act as support roles? Do you want them to be attacking threats? Do you want to combine stage 1s best with their stage 2 counterparts, or do you want them to act independently? How balanced are all the types? Does one have coverage over multiple others? These are all questions that you have to ask. It's a long list of things, really. It can get a little bit confusing. Overall, I wouldn't stress... I mean, I would stress out about it a little bit, but it's something that you have to figure out for yourself. It takes time to build something. Here's my initial cube that I built, actually. It doesn't look like much work right here. It looks like I've just almost arbitrarily picked evolution lines and whatnot, but these are some pretty cool archetypes and lines, and I think it's fairly balanced as well in my cube right now. So really, you got to have a stage 1 and stage 2 for each type that you're going for. This is obviously 8 types, 9 types. 9 types here. I actually did have a 10th type. I had a dragon in there for a second, or for one draft, but it didn't really work out how I liked it to, so I cut it. But yeah, you basically choose your favorites or whatever you want to. There's lots of variety with my own cube. Blaziken, again, as I said, Blaziken, Ninetales, it's sort of energy acceleration. Blaziken does big snipes. Ninetales also has gusting effects. Venusaur is more of the tanking archetype in my cube. Yanmega sort of acts independently of Venusaur. Yanmega's often picked up on his own just because it has free retreat and sometimes free attacks, which makes it very powerful. So these ones sort of act independently of each other. Empoleon, just one of the best archetypes out there, really. It gives you spreading options, it gives you draw power. Milotic, again, sort of works independently of Empoleon because of the support that Milotic gets. Not really an attacking class, but one that can really help out. Ampharos, very unique with all of his poker bodies and stuff like that, denying people attaching energy and using supporters, or at least punishing them for it. Raichu is a pretty nice powerhouse stage 1. Gardeglade, just... it's a staple, really. People love Gardeglade. It's oftentimes people's go-to psychic choice because of the variety that these cards give you. Drifblim's a really nice one. Machamp's powerful. Lucario. I'm not going to go through all this because there's so many Pokemon to talk about. But yeah, that's my own choice. But do take thought into building your own, really. If you are building these lines, this is what I would advise. If you're going for stage 2s, I would go for 8 basics, 6 stage 1s, 5 stage 2s, plus any level X's or breaks you want to. So as you can see, this is actually just the snapshot from my own cube. This is my own Empoleon line that I play, and my own Milotic line that I play. And if you're going for stage 1s, 6 basics, 4 stage 1s, I think is a good amount. And that again fits in with all the maths that I've made earlier. It should be pretty easy for you to fit these categories for the types that you play. So overall, this isn't set in stone. You can cut cards here and there. But overall, I would advise that keeping evolution lines equal will keep it fair, really. Everyone has the same shot of getting their lines built no matter what type they pick. So it doesn't make sense to have like 6 Empoleons but only 4 Blazikins to pick from, because you're naturally more likely to draft Empoleons if you just happen to choose the water guy at some point during your drafting process. So it's all about balance, really. That's what's really important. Let's start looking at my cube. So this is my first ever cube that I built. As I said, this is like 6 months ago, having played in like 3 or 4 cubes previously and absolutely been in awe of the idea and absolutely loved it. I did a lot of research into cube, and it took me a while to assemble all these cards, obviously. I have been collecting for like 8 to 10 years though, so I have a lot of cards and I just hoard them. I never get rid of them. So as you can see, I've got as much bling in there as possible, as many reverses as possible as well in my own cube. But here we go. Here's a little snapshot. We've got all the types going down here: the grass, the water, the fire, the lightning, blah, 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 with the stage 1s just beneath them. And then I've got all the individual Pokemon just for some inspiration. If you guys are, again, thinking of building your own cube, you can just, again, take a screenshot or pause the video or whatever, and you can get some inspiration for some of these cards. They don't have to go into your own cube, but these are just ones that I've enjoyed using and playing with. From there, we have all the, we have the supporter cards, the stadiums, tools, special energy cards, and all the item cards as well from all sorts of generations. You can see I am using a few ace specs here and there. We've got even old cards as well. We've got things like Pokemon Breeder, which is rare candy. We've got Pokemon Reversal, all sorts of things from all different generations. Loads of different cards here. Again, you don't really have to pay much attention to this, but it just gives you an idea of the scale and size of an actual cube. If you are trying to build it, it is not easy to build your own cube, just physically, let alone the thought process that goes into it. Next up, let's talk about custom cards. Custom cards are a really great way to let your creative juices flow. You can fill gaps with specific supporters or item cards. You can help, again, balance evolution lines. If one of them's underperforming, you can make a custom card that can help out a specific archetype, for example. That could be pretty cool. In my own cube, I use some customs for an extra personal touch. It adds to the fun of the drafting process, whilst also adding an element of skill, as players must analyze never-before-seen cards and decide whether they should be drafted over anything else in their packs. So, as you can see, OmniPoke fan club, that's one of my friends, Luke, there, and it's a pretty fun supporter, pretty balanced. But as you can see, it's just overall, more cards in the pool is fun. Just Joe Things is another great supporter card. That one's pretty OP, so I had to cover it up. But yeah, it involves top decking, as you can imagine. Another thing you can do is offer the winner of your draft the chance to create their own custom card as a reward for their success. That's another really cool way to go. It gives a real fun incentive to win the contest rather than just trying to have bragging rights for a week. It's a much more lasting impression if you end up being able to add a card to someone's cube permanently on a future basis. This is something actually one of my friends introduced me to, and I thought it was a really cool way to incentivize trying to win the cube and trying to take everything seriously. Naturally, Pokemon players are very competitive anyway, so it shouldn't take much to get people competitive and wanting to win in the first place, but having custom cards as an incentive for the winner is a great way to really incentivize people to win a cube and makes it that much more tense when you're in games. So let's talk about keeping up with a cube. There's lots of reasons why you may wish to tweak your cube after it's completed. There can be upgrades from new sets or expansions. You can then trade out some weaker cards and add them for new cards, not necessarily always going up in power level. We have to keep things balanced and fair, of course, the whole time. But if there are cards that simply become useless because there's something that's a pure upgrade, you can definitely go for that. Additionally, if your budget expands, you can go from proxies to going for bling if you really want to. If you really want to be proud of your cube, which many people are after putting that much work into them, trying to bling it out as much as possible could be something that you go for. One of the main things I like to go for is if there's criticism or a lack of satisfaction within the cube, As I mentioned, I actually had Garchomp in my cube, if you guys noticed from the pictures at one point. He's no longer in my cube because he was actually too OP. So after playing with the Garchomp line, I've had to now put him into the Hall of Fame, and he can no longer be used. And we have new evolution lines that we're going to be trying out. The next one on my list is actually going to be a Dusknoir line, and that seems to be balanced and fair. So cool. If there's, after playing with the cube, if there's cards that are under or overperforming, you may want to analyze that. If it happens multiple times, you may think about having to go to alternatives instead. Also, if people have gone towards some sort of innovative strategy, if someone's trying to build a mill archetype and it just falls flat on their face because there's not enough within the cube to actually build a successful list along those lines, you may want to add some more toys for that approach. You can add in things like Team Rocket's Handiwork, cards like that, just to make that approach a little bit more viable, a little bit more useful. And it does breathe life into future drafts because you know that people can go down spread routes, or they can go down stall routes, or they can go for heavy variants on lots of different lines of play to win the game. And I think the more variety and the more access people have to these different approaches, the more exciting it makes for people drafting, and it also creates a nice competition for resources as well. If cards can fulfill certain roles in multiple regards, it just becomes a highly demanded card, and it makes the drafting process again very interesting. So the other thing is just simply wanting a change. If you've played a few games with the same card pool, you can switch things up, keep things exciting. So that is going to be it for keeping a cube fresh. Now I'm going to be doing something which I'm sure a lot of people will be happy with. I've jotted down a bunch of the popular stage 1 and 2s from each type to really limit the amount of work you want to do if you want to build a cube. Now, I'm not saying you should take my advice on these, but these are popular ones which have been in other cubes and seem to be on a relatively reasonable power level to go on with, and this will hopefully reduce your workload if you are going to be building a cube. I won't be talking too much about these. Charizard is a pretty nice one. Normally has quite high HP, so he is on the powerful side. Blaziken's one that I have in my cube. He's cool. This one is the Accelerator. Some of these have big sniping attacks. This one has auto burn, which is obviously much better now that it's been updated. Chandler, obviously a really cool evolution line. That's a nice one. The only real downside is that it's dual type. And when you have dual type classes within your cube, you have to be aware of weaknesses, and having too many psychic Pokemon as attackers could make the fighting archetype a little bit weak or whatever else, so something to bear in mind. Or if you just happen to have lots of things weak to dark, you have to make sure that your dark type archetype is not too OP, and that your water type archetype doesn't have too many weaknesses itself, because it basically doesn't hit anything for weakness if the player using a fire deck can then choose to only get out their psychics in that matchup. So lots of things to consider, as I mentioned, with a cube. But yeah, Chandler's one I really love. Infernape, another cool one. You can use either level X if you want to, if you're ignoring the fact that it has the Elite Four little logo up there, whatever. Typhlosion, again, another cool one. We got Empoleon for Magmortar for a stage 1. Don't know where Empoleon came from. Magcargo is a surprisingly decent one. The Smooth Over Magcargo. We're actually getting this as a reprint, I think, soon, and it combos with Zoroark. Arcanine's a nice one. Arcanine Break, I think, is a little bit too OP, but I thought I'd sneak him in here anyway. Volcarona, I think if we get a few more interesting Volcaronas, this could actually be a viable one in a few, maybe like a year or so's time, if we get some sets with Volcaronas in, so be aware of that one. Ninetales is one that I use just because there's a few really nice ones. Onto the water stuff. Stoice. Kingdra is a really OP one. I'm really hesitant to ever build a Kingdra line because everything is just one energy and it's really efficient and powerful. I don't think I'd ever run Kingdra. I think it's too OP. Swampert's one that I really want to use, but I just can't not play Empoleon because A, it's one of my favorite Pokemon, and B, I really love how the evolution line sort of lines up. There's lots of variety here. The level X is really cool. There's lots of spread attacks on some of these Empoleons. Dignified Fighter's a nice one, and Diving Draw is just OP as well. So I can't take myself away from Empoleon, but there's lots of cool water types overall. Another one is the Polys, which you can go for a little bit of more gimmicky side. Ludicolo is surprisingly good with some catcher effects and some healing and stuff like that. Walrein as well, surprisingly decent as well. Gyarados is always a fun one for people to go for, trying to chase the Tail Revenge Gyarados line. Getting a bunch of Magikarps and stuff like that can be really cool. These are potentially very powerful attacks if you have enough Magikarps in your lineup. Got Tittery, more of a supporting role. Golduck as well, a little bit more on the support side. Lots of supporting cards really for the water stage ones. I think Milotic is the best pick of the bunch unless you want to go for Gyarados, which is more on the aggressive side. Pretty cool there. We've got some psychic types as well. Slowking's cool, Starmie. The old Glalie Floor, I can't even remember what it is, Frostlass. Venusaur, my boy, one of my favorites. He also gained a little Dark Ivysaur, which is nice. If you want to troll people, you can have item lock in your cube if you really want to, with Blossom as well. Beedrill, there's lots of speedier Kakunas and Weedles as well, which can evolve up and make it a lot quicker. So this could be sort of a rush style archetype. Pretty cool. I used to love Beedrill back in the day. Torterra alongside Venusaur, these are like the tanking ones. Sceptile as well can be on the tankier side if you want to go for some big stage 2 grass types. Victreebel's another stage 2, which is a little bit more annoying for people to deal with. Tangrowth I think is actually a little bit too OP because the level X is just really insane. And some of these attacks are also very powerful as well if you get acceleration within your draft. Yeah, Mega seems to be a really cool one. Lots of people go for him. I do like it. Roserade and Roselia. I think with one or two more Roserades, that could be pretty interesting. What else are we working with here? We got Amphiroses. Electros is another one of the fairly newer ones, which is very close to being a really cool one. Luxray as well, just so that you can use Luxray GL level X. You can go for that also. The new Luxray is absolutely super OP, but who knows, maybe it's worth building around. Raichu, Electivire, Electrode, Manectric, all pretty cool options there. For fighting types, there's not much option for stage 2s. Fortunately, Machamp's a great one that people love playing just because it has nostalgia from Take Out Machamp and from the Prime. There's the fighting tag one. There's lots of different Machamps you can go for. The Rhyperior is another really fun one because you have 2 different Rhyperiors that discard the top cards of your opponent's deck, so it creates some chaos and you can get some crazy wins just from that alone. It is a little bit on the chunky side, a little bit slow, but can work out just by the amount of hit points these guys have. Donphan is another favorite from a lot of people. It is on the powerful side, so be aware. You want to have, I think if you're going to be playing Donphan, you want to have Gyarados in your cube as well, so it can be another check to Donphan, because otherwise this can run riot against people. Either you want to have Gyarados as an attacker, or you want to have some other stage 1s that have resistance to fighting, because this guy just gets out of hand otherwise. Lucario is very cool. I actually had this Lucario alongside my Garchomp. That was the main reason why I made it too OP, because basically in 2 different drafts, no one denied the Lucario from the Garchomp player, so they had the ridiculous search engine and everything went insane. So yeah, Gliscor's another really fun one. You're spoiled for choice for the psychic types. Crobats are really fun. Gengars, Guardy, Gallade, Dusknoir, they're all very fun, interesting archetypes. Stage 1 wise, you also have some cool options. I think balloons are a very good one for you there. Dark types, I think the Hydreigon is another one that's one to keep an eye on. This one could be pretty high on the power level, if not a little bit too expensive. Crocodile's also getting up there. Tyranitar and Shiftry, also pretty cool options. Then we got ourselves Honchkrow. Everyone loves Honchkrow. Some nice old favorites there. There's a Houndoom, which actually has item lock as well, which is a fun one for the cube. It's balanced because it's based on bench sizes, so both players can play around it all game, and it's a real interesting trade-off. So that's a pretty cool Houndoom to keep an eye on. Plus you get the Houndoom Prime, which does instant burn as well, which is, plus 20 on coin flips each turn. Just really makes games much more chaotic. Weavars are pretty close to being good. Steel type, spoiled for choice. I've done a huge line on Magnezone. I absolutely love this guy because there's so many Magnetons that are all super interesting as well, because in the early era of Pokemon, of course, there wasn't even Magnezone. It wasn't released yet. It was Gen 4 Pokemon, so loads of Magnetons were rares, and they were the top of the evolution chain, so they had some pretty cool and interesting abilities throughout, so you're really spoiled for choice with the Magnezone line, if a little bit on the high power level side. Aggron, Metagross, some fan favorites there as well. Bronzong, Scizor, another fan favorite card. This is pretty cool. This This is all really nice in cube. We got ourselves Porygon. Porygon 2, again, just like the Magneton, there's really cool Stage 1 Porygons. This Porygon 2 right up here is probably one of the strongest cards in my entire cube. It's a really insane card, so don't sleep on the Porygon line if you're playing in my cube. Pidgeot as well, an old favourite from Quick Search, and Togekiss as well. Some more colourless Pokemon. Dodrio, this is always a nice one, giving people retreat. Retreating is really important in cubes, actually, because the amount of switching cards available to you is low, and if you have a chunkier Pokemon, having a Dodrio in there is really nice. Quick Draw, or sorry, Echo Draw also gives you a nice thing to chase down as well as a Dodrio. And we got Noctowl, that's another cool one with the break as a really vicious attacker potentially. Blissey's one you have to be careful of because too much healing just makes the tanking archetypes absolutely absurdly powerful. So you do have to be careful with Blissey. You need to make sure that there are Pokemon that can almost just hard counter the entire tanking archetypes, because otherwise Blissey just gets super out of hand. Delcatty, a nice energy accelerator, can be universally fun. Evolutions as well. Evolutions are sort of dumped in. Usually you can get away with just having like 10 different EVs and then a handful of these evolutions, or like 6 or 7 EVs and just 1 or 2 cherry-picked ones. But again, these can help out if you have certain archetypes that are higher on the power level. You can add a little bit of extra weakness against them, something like that. Again, it's all about balance, really. That's what I'm trying to drive home, and the evolutions are a great way to do that with some interesting cards in there as well. Leafeon, Leafeon Flareon's some of my favourite cards ever printed. This Espeon's really cool in cube as well. Lots of different cool cards that you can go for. So yeah, I know that was a little bit rambly and all over the place, but if you are trying to build a cube, that's probably saved you a lot of time. So if you do appreciate that, let me know down below. So that is the closing thoughts. Essentially, try look for creative and interesting Pokemon. That would be my first bit of advice. Don't just pick... I know it's tempting to just pick your favourite Pokemon or one of the newer Pokemon, but looking for Pokemon that do creative and interesting things will create the best gameplay for you. Have different directions and strategies within your archetypes, so you can have, again, really interesting gameplay and varied throughout multiple runs, because once you've built this cube for like 600 or so cards, it's a lot of work even just to take one evolution line out. For example, my 20 Garchomp cards or whatever that I've got to change now for 20 Dusknoir cards, that's a lot of work for me to try and go through my entire collection to look for all these Duskulls and Dusclopses and stuff like that. So once you've built it, you want to make sure it's as good as possible. So having some variety and keeping it interesting is really cool. Another thing to note is the most powerful cards don't necessarily mean the best. Sometimes you need to be disciplined when you choose your cards for cube, and always have the power level in mind. If you have one card that's completely vital to an evolution line, it can actually cause a really bad feeling if the player doesn't get the chance to draft it, thus making their entire draft a dud, and then it won't be fun for them. So, for example, if you have something like Magnezone Prime, if that player starts drafting Magnezone and they don't find Magnezone Prime, it can completely ruin their entire strategy. It's actually not the case because Magnezone's so powerful, but something along those lines where having one card that's much higher in the power level than many of your other cards in the cube, although it makes it really important for that one person to pick the card up, it's just not nice for a balancing aspect. So you want to make sure that there's a handful of very good cards. Obviously, there's naturally going to be cards that will get picked over others. But having one card that's much more powerful than all the others doesn't necessarily make it a good fit for a cube. So bear that in mind. There's actually, I have a suspect list for cards that I might have to take out of my cube because they are too powerful. And that's something that I would suggest you guys have as well. As I said, balance is the key. You have similar amounts of HP and damage output between your archetypes within reason. Sometimes experimentation is actually just the best way to figure out if something's powerful or not. There's a handful of cards that you want to have draw engines in there. You want to have things like Spiritomb. There's a few question cards that I have within my cube that I am monitoring how powerful they are. But balance is the key, really. Sometimes they will overperform, sometimes they'll underperform or whatever. But as long as everyone has a chance to get set up and get playing, that's going to create the most fun experience for everyone. So trying to make sure all the archetypes are relatively equal on power level is the best way to do that, and then just gameplay will prove who wins. And again, keep in mind that the best cubes try and keep dead weight to a minimum. This is obviously easiest if you are doing a mutant draft, and there's naturally always going to be an element of dead weight if you don't go for a mutant line. But it doesn't mean that every card has to be strong, and it means that you can have the odd meme card here and there just for a refreshing atmosphere and seeing that card get passed around friends and laughing at it. But ultimately, you want every card to have a purpose in your cube. You don't want to have cards just for the sake of having the card in there. You want it to be able to go within this strategy or have this line of play or combo with this card or whatever. So every single card needs to be in your cube for a reason, and that's something very important that I definitely will like to drive home if you are trying to build your own cube. So lots of talking today, guys, all about cube. I hope this has driven a passion into you of trying to build one of your own now. And even if you don't build one, go and play one, because cubes are absolutely awesome and so much fun. So lots of information for you guys to digest. I don't know how well it came across, but I really hope you did enjoy the video. Nonetheless, that's it from me today, guys. Lots of chat about cube. I hope you did enjoy it. And I'm going to be bringing my cube to Sheffield, I think. So there'll be potentially an opportunity for a few people to play it. I don't know if we're going to... I don't know, I might put it in the Discord and ask some people if they want to come do it on like the Thursday or the Friday or something like that before the actual event. That could be a really cool thing to sort of, almost like a giveaway style thing, to join the cube and have fun with it. So who knows, but that's going to be it for me today, guys. Please leave a like to the video if you did. This took me a while, not only to build my own cube and get all my information out there for you guys, but also the slides and everything else as well. This has been rambly. I've tried to have notes to the side of me, but as well, you know, I can't help myself just talking nonsense. So that is going to be it, guys. And leave a like to the video if you did. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But it has been Joe from OmniPoke, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.